Hello, welcome to this Introduction to Waste Auditing webinar presentation. Before we get into the content and the overview of what we'll be discussing today, I'll take a moment to introduce myself. I am Ben Dunbar. I'm the Manager of Waste Services at AET Group. I've been with AET for over 15 years now, and over that period of time, I've spent 95% plus of my time working on waste audits of one type or another. I've had the pleasure of working on projects right across Canada, from Newfoundland to BC up to the Northwest Territories and down into the US as well. All kinds of things in both the municipal and the private sector, waste audits, surveys, inventories, litter audits, MRF audits of various types. Often these types of waste audits are tied into further work related to waste reduction work plans, waste management planning, and so on and so forth. Our clientele is quite varied, as I mentioned, across many sectors, from large municipalities to small private organizations, again, both in the public and private sectors. So I guess with that, I am bringing the perspective of, I guess, firsthand experience and that of someone that has that practical hands-on experience that hopefully will translate into some useful information for you all. So what I'm hoping to cover today is in a relatively brief period of time, I'd provide you with a general introduction to an overview of waste auditing. So it is, believe it or not, quite a potentially broad subject area, and there's many different types of waste audits, and there are literally courses that you could take that would be multiple days in duration, and even at that, just focusing on a particular type of waste auditing. So my intent here is not to get into all the nuances and the nitty-gritty particulars of it, although I have a tendency to get into that on occasion. I'll try and avoid that as best as I can, but in any case, provide you with a general overview of auditing, some of the common elements that would be applicable to any types of waste audits, and then if in wrapping things up, I think I will sort of focus in on walking through, for lack of a better term, the general approach and outcomes that you might be able to expect from, let's say, a facility or a private sector type of facility waste audit. So with that, I'll move right into what are we talking about today? So when we talk about waste, it might seem like an obvious word or term, but it can be interpreted in different ways. So for purposes of clarification, when we're talking about waste, we're talking about not only garbage or disposed trash, we're talking about also divertible types of waste as well. So even if something's recycled or composted, that's still waste. It's just handled in a different way post disposal. Waste can be generated by many different sources, from residential sources, industrial, commercial, institutional. There are hazardous waste, non-hazardous waste, solid or liquid waste. For the purposes of our conversation today, I'll be generally focusing on solid, non-hazardous waste and audits related to those types of waste streams. Not to say that some of the general ideas and principles that we're discussing couldn't be applicable to other types, but we'll be sticking to solid, non-hazardous. Audit. So when it comes to the second part of the term waste audits, when we're talking about audit, we're talking about a systematic and documented process to obtain evidence, evaluate it objectively, using clearly defined and repeatable methods. So audit is not a term certainly that's just related to waste audits. There are many different types of audits out there. The most common one, which people would be familiar with, would be financial type of audits. There's regulatory compliance audits, environmental management system audits, and so on. And the common thread between all these is that it is a systematic and documented process to evaluate something and using a clearly define a repeatable method. So keep that in mind as we're talking about undertaking waste audits, as that's the kind of general idea you want to, the mindset you want to have as you're thinking about planning one and executing an audit. There may be some other terms that you've heard out there when it comes to waste auditing, waste composition study, a waste characterization study or audit, dumpster dive. We're essentially all talking about the same thing, so we could use these for the purposes of our conversation today interchangeably. Dumpster dive. I've definitely been in some dumpsters. I can't say I've dove into any, but anyway, sometimes we're known as dumpster divers. So why are waste audits undertaken? I guess fundamentally it's to determine the amount, nature, and composition of waste, perhaps to gather baseline data to which future performance can be compared, monitoring program and system performance over time. A good, well-designed and executed audit can also provide empirical data that can be very useful in many circumstances to support decision making. So okay, great. You can do an audit and get all this great data and information out of them. But what why though? So, okay, good. We have data, but what's the driver for that? Why do people, or why might organizations be interested in or want to get this kind of information? Maybe some of the most obvious reasons might be related to direct costs associated with waste handling and disposal. So those could literally be the cost of garbage or recycling bins and the services associated with transporting and disposal of those. Wastes are, things that are physical, things that are materials that are handled and moved about and transported and hauled. So there are labor costs associated with handling and managing all these materials. The fact that there's all this stuff in bins or bags going out the back door of a particular location, is also related to just the stuff that's in those bags, and in many cases, a significant or notable portion of what ends up in various waste streams are, single-use consumable type of items or materials that have purchase costs associated with them. Like I'll just say, for example, paper hand towels or disposable cutlery or coffee cups that are provided in a cafeteria or something. All these things that have a cost associated with procuring and purchasing them as well. So there could be the driver there could be looking for opportunities for cost savings on those fronts. I guess looking at a little bit of higher level view of things, there's also indirect costs associated with waste and waste disposal, and certainly environmental might be the first thing that comes to mind with indirect costs associated with waste, and that would be the impacts of landfills and maybe upstream resource usage and emissions and embedded energy and transportation impacts and so on, with relating to the consumption of materials and goods and transport and handling of them post life. Managing waste also has administrative types of activities associated with it that would fall into the indirect cost column. Increasingly, we're seeing more, influence of stakeholder or client or customer perceptions related to, more broadly, environmental type of performance of an operation or organization or municipality or community. And that could be an indirect cost associated with, your perception by external stakeholders as well. In many cases, there could also be regulatory, contractual, or other voluntary requirements that are drivers for doing a waste audit or monitoring and measuring various waste streams. A few examples here. In Ontario, for example, there is a provincial regulation 102/94, that does require certain industrial, commercial, institutional facilities of certain types and sizes to do a waste audit and prepare a waste reduction work plan, updated annually. So this would apply to certain manufacturing facilities, retail complexes, schools, hospitals, hotels and motels, and others. So in Ontario in particular, that is a driver for many, is to check that regulatory compliance box, depending on the type of facility that it is. There are other voluntary types of programs that many organizations or facilities subscribe to, such as BOMA Best, LEED, 3R certified, zero waste to landfill, and so on. So many of those have waste monitoring and measuring aspects related to them. Waste and recycling processing contracts. This one tends to be more applicable to the public sector or municipal types of arrangements where there may be a private waste collector or processor or recycler that handles material that is, generated or delivered by a municipality, let's say, and within those particular contractual arrangements, there are requirements or parameters based on the composition or the quality of material being taken to a facility, or again the performance of the processing facility itself. And many jurisdictions, and this seems to be another area that is ever growing and becoming more prevalent all the time, is EPR, or extended producer responsibility reporting and fee setting. So this would be related to regulatory schemes where producers of certain types of packaging and printed paper materials, for example, are responsible for remitting fees to cover the cost of recovery of those at end of life. And with that, there's a lot of money changing hands, and with that it comes a need for good data to administer and report on it and track who owes what and how those recovery systems are working. And I guess related to my point on the previous slide about external stakeholder perceptions, we are seeing more and more corporate sustainability goals and reporting being a driver or a trigger for increased interest in monitoring and measuring waste streams. So getting into now a little bit of an overview of some different or general high-level approaches to waste audits. I've just broadly kind of lumped them together here into desktop, visual, or physical waste auditing. I'll discuss those in a little bit further detail in a moment. And then, the waste audits are done across various sectors as well. So broadly under the municipal sector, landfill audits. So literally looking at general broad-based, what is coming into our landfill from what sources, and what's the composition or the quantities of various materials from different haulers or generators or sectors that come into a landfill. MRF, so this is like a material recovery or recycling facility audits. So what's the quality or the contamination rate of inbound material that's being dropped off at a MRF for processing? How efficiently is a MRF operating in terms of, for all of the good recyclable material that's coming in the front door, what proportion of it is being recovered through the process and not inadvertently or deliberately perhaps ending up in the residue stream going out the back to landfill? And then for the commodities that a MRF does recover, how clean and pure are those various commodities of materials that a MRF separates? Big one in the municipal sector is residential waste auditing. So this would be related to what single family households are setting out at the curb. What's in the garbage? What proportion of a garbage stream could be diverted under our existing curbside recycling and or organics diversion program, a multi-residential, so apartment or multi-unit residential audits, and so on. Depots, so there are many municipalities that operate depots where residents or businesses can self-haul their waste to drop off, and there can be interest in understanding what it is that's being brought into those types of facilities. Public space, this would be, parks, along streets, and so on, where the public has access to recycling and sometimes garbage, or the potential to, and there's an interest in many cases to get a better understanding of what's happening in those locations as well. And then the private sector facility types of audits, I did touch on them a little bit when we talked about the regulatory requirements in Ontario, but these are the types of audits that we'd be looking specifically at, usually a particular facility or operation, like an office tower, a school, hospital, store, a manufacturing facility, and things like that. So again, there are many potential drivers or reasons why those types of facilities might want to undertake a waste audit, but it's certainly there's different approaches, obviously, between not only doing a different waste audit for an office tower versus a school, but certainly talking, all the various types of municipal audits that you might do, and otherwise there is no one and only, or one set, here's how you do a waste audit sort of thing. So I guess with that understanding, like I mentioned, there's all kinds of nuances and particulars that come into play. And the intent of our discussion today is, I guess, to make you aware of these various types of waste audits and things to consider and think about as you might get involved in one way or another in planning or preparing, or even maybe reviewing or reading or interpreting data that comes out of one of these types of audits or another. And certainly for anyone that may have an interest in getting more involved in or undertaking waste audits more directly, there'd be more further information to be gathered to dig into the particulars of all these various types of audits that can be done. So going back to those couple of high level general approaches that you could take to doing a waste audit study, desktop or visual types of audits would be what I would say more kind of in theory, big picture types of approaches. A starting point, doing some background research, certainly cheaper, doesn't cost as much. So we're talking about almost an accounting exercise, or reviewing data and records. When it gets to the visual approach, sometimes this could be better than an actual physical hands-on audit, and in particular, if you're looking at bulky or construction and demolition waste and things like that. The visual audit approach, where you're literally visually inspecting loads of material, for example, might be the most appropriate or best way to do it, as opposed to extracting small samples to physically sort and separate. That doesn't always make sense for bulkier types of materials. Physical or hands-on auditing is more the in practice. So a desktop, in theory, kind of looking at the numbers. Oh, we have X amount of tons of garbage that's disposed of per year. Okay, good. What's in that garbage stream? Well, that's where the physical, hands-on, in practice approach comes into play. So this gets you more into digging into, literally, I guess you could say, what is inherent in helping with implementation of potential initiatives, or performance evaluation and things like that. The hands-on physical audit approach, though, does come with the trade-off that it is certainly labor-intensive and obviously more costly as well. So to do these things correctly and do these audits in detail is very labor-intensive. So in any case, whichever approach is being taken, you always want to start with clearly defined objectives. So really, what it is that you want to get out of the audit? How will the information from the audit be used? From that, you would outline your audit scope. So what do we have to study to achieve our objectives? There has to be reasonable limits placed on these. I'm not a statistician, but I have this idea of sampling and representative sampling and so on comes up very often. And although it's out of my realm of expertise, I do know in the research that we've done and the conversations that we've had and my understanding of statistical representativeness is that it really is cost prohibitive to actually truly achieve statistical representative sample sizes when it comes to waste auditing. So, the number of samples that you'd have to collect over a period of time, would be in some cases the hundreds or thousands of samples, which obviously is not feasible. You can't feasibly have do a waste audit on material collected over months and months and months, or a whole year of operations at a facility, or thousands of households and so on. So with that, you sort of have to define limits based on your objectives and sort of get the best bang for your buck, so to speak, when you're going about these things. So really focus it in on what it is that you're trying to achieve, have some limits set around that, and there is that delicate balance between the budget and the scope of your project. So more is always better when it comes to sampling, if I was to make a general statement, but certainly at a certain point you start to get that idea of the law of diminishing returns kicking in, where after a certain point, yes, every additional sample or every additional 100 kilograms of waste that you sort is going to provide you more confidence in results, but really that incremental gain and your confidence is really at some point not worth the extra effort and cost that comes into play. Like any general study or scientific study, you want to, as best you can, limit the assumptions and variables that could impact or come into play with affecting what it is that you're looking at. For example, assuming that waste generation and composition are constant throughout the whole year. So if you're doing let's say a municipal residential waste audit, for example, you might want to give consideration to seasonal fluctuations in household activities and associated waste generation. If you're doing a facility audit of one type or another, like a school, you want to obviously be aware of the fact that there's likely less activity or almost no activity during summer or holiday months versus the regular school year type of months, and account for that not only in your sampling plan, but also when you're taking your audit results and translating that into extrapolated or annual estimates of what a facility might produce. Be cautious of using old data sets or data from other sources as a proxy for your particular target or focus. For those that are in the waste sector, you'll probably be aware of the term the evolving ton, and that is that the nature and composition of waste is changing all the time, and for various reasons. There are ever-changing things out in the marketplace that people are consuming and doing, and not to mention the last couple of years of pandemic and how that has shifted where people are working, what kind of things they're doing and not doing, and all kinds of new things that might be in the waste or not in the waste that were only a couple of years ago. So certainly be aware of that. When we're talking about the scope of audits, to clearly define scope is particularly important if you're going to solicit tenders from consultants or some external party to conduct your audits, so that when you're comparing quotes, for example, you want to ensure you're comparing apples to apples, so to speak. Like I mentioned previously, there is not one and only way or one standard. Okay, I want a waste audit. Here's what you're getting. So, you could be getting, if you solicit tender quotes from 3 people, you could have somebody submitting a quote to do a desktop or walkthrough or visual audit of your site. Then you could have somebody that's would take a very detailed hands-on, where they would have a team of 2 or 3 or 4 auditors on site for 2 or 3 days to really do a detailed analysis. So either clearly defined scope, or if not, if you're not sure what exactly it is, the best way to take is to leave that open, but allow for potential auditors to themselves propose and outline what approach they're taking, so that again, you understand what it is that you're looking for and what you might be getting for a particular cost associated with that. I guess following along that train of thought is, when you're planning and preparing for an audit of one type or another, is determining or ensuring you're involving the right people. So there's all kinds of different arrangements or different parties that can and do get involved in waste audits. There's internal audits, so this would be organizations verifying or auditing their own systems. So that could be an office. You got your office building, and you're conducting your own internal with your own team audit of the waste and so on that you produce in your facility, or a municipality just internally using their own staff and resources to undertake an audit of the residential waste stream or something like that. A second party, or this would be one example, or one type of external type of audit, would be an organization verifying or auditing activities of its suppliers, subcontractors, or vendors. So I guess a specific example of that might be let's say a recycling or MRF operator auditing inbound loads of curbside recycling that is dropped off by a particular municipality or something like that. And then there's third-party audits, which would be an organization being verified or audited by an independent body or external. So that would be, I guess I'll use a similar type of example where there's a private operator of a recycling facility under contract with a municipality to process the material, and a third-party independent auditor would be brought in to look at the quality of the composition or the performance of that facility, so that the independent auditor is not affiliated, doesn't have a stake in one side or the other as far as what the results yield. So I guess factors to consider if you're involved in planning or figuring out what kind of approach or who's going to be involved in an audit would be obviously resource availability. As I said, the physical or hands-on types of audits can be quite labor intensive. So do you have the internal resources available to undertake that work? Budget, defendable. What I mean by that is in some cases, decisions that are being made based on the outcomes or the findings of an audit or a study, waste composition study of some sort, need to be defendable. And by that, sometimes there's actual perceived stakes involved with internal people being involved in a project or a study that might yield a particular outcome where if an external party is used and their expertise is used, that can sometimes or in many cases end up being more defendable as far as making a case for a particular change or funding or things like that. On the question of, or the subject of independent or unbiased, is to be aware of perceived or actual conflicts of interest that could come into play. Something that does come up from time to time is, for example, like let's use the example of a waste hauler, a waste hauling company providing waste audit services for a client or facility that they service. So there could be the potential, I would say, for or a perceived potential conflict of interest there in that they're in the business of hauling waste and they're doing a waste audit, and what would be the potentially to their detriment to have findings that would result in less waste being produced, or finding an alternate diversion option for materials that might be outside of their services or something like that. So it's just something to be aware of. So moving on now into the kind of how. So I'm gonna generally here be going through. I'll bounce around a little bit, but if I was to be considering how to do a waste audit for a particular, let's say, facility, the municipal types of waste audits that I mentioned earlier are a little bit too broad in terms of the different types and approaches you might take. But I think even with that being said, some of the things that I'll be discussing here in the context of doing a waste audit for a particular facility are applicable to any type of audit. So a starting point for anything would be to kind of see where establishing a baseline or a waste audit profile. So what do we know about what's currently being generated, where it's going, how much of it? So oftentimes operations will generally have be able to provide, or you can find within your own operation, information on how many garbage bins there are, what size are they, how frequently are they serviced, are there weight records available for what's collected. Same thing for commingled or containers and fibers recycling streams, the cardboard bins, scrap metal, pallets, and anything else, everything else that a facility might generate. So starting out with finding out what's being generated and what quantities. Oftentimes you will also be able to find some sort of records associated with those, and many or most waste haulers or service providers do or can provide reports, usually broken down monthly, for what they have collected from a particular site over time. And I will take a moment here to highlight the fact that although this is good data and a good reference, you have to, I would not take everything you see here as at its face value, and by that I mean the weights that are often populated or provided in these summaries may not always be actual weights. Oftentimes they're estimated weights, or a general conversion or volume density factor applied to what it is that's collected at a site. So more specifically, for things like recycling carts or organics carts, or even front end garbage bins, most often, if a truck comes into a facility to collect or empty those, that truck is on a route or a milk run where they're collecting carts or bins from this facility. They're going next door or down the road and collecting another, and by the time they get to the landfill or the transfer station scale, they have a truck full of material from multiple facilities. So they have no way of providing a breakdown of how much of that truckload by weight came from facility A, B, or C on the route. There are some front end or overhead collection trucks that do have onboard scales, in which case they are able to provide weights for each stop that they've done. That is becoming more prevalent, but I would say it's still not widely the case. Certainly when it comes to anything trucks that service carts for recycling organics, it's even less likely that they would have had any sort of onboard scale. So in this particular slide, you'll see I have one cell highlighted in the formula bar in Excel there. I found that for this facility, I could see there's a formula in there, 24, in this case, times 0.05 tons. So basically, that tells me that in September, they picked up 24 carts of cans and bottles, and then they applied a standard weight of 50 kilos per cart. So so this will be an estimated weight, and they've just applied, they just assume for every cart that they picked up, it weighs 50 kilos. And we know from practical real world experience that there could be some carts that are a quarter full, half full, overflowing, and certainly, especially these days with cans and bottles being mostly plastic and aluminum, not really glass anymore, it would be tough or impossible to get 50 kilograms of cans and bottles into a cart. So these estimates, just be aware of them and clarify or seek further information on what you might find in these reports if they're actual or estimated weights, and do a little bit of digging. So for tracking, aggregate data from the various service providers, as I mentioned, verify the accuracy of estimated and explore methods for tracking actual weights. So if you determine or find out that, oh, these reports we've been getting in terms of our monthly diversion or recycling numbers are all based on just how many carts we set out, and they're assuming they're all full and they all weigh the same amount. You could set up a system for having a facility, even if not all the time, which would be ideal, for a period of time or periodically, keeping track or weighing carts of actual material that is generated on that site before they go out. So something as simple as hanging a clipboard up near the exit door where the cleaning staff or whoever is responsible for moving the carts out would weigh every cart that goes out over the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or a month, and logging it. And then that could be the if the hauler is not able to provide actual weights going forward, use the actual weights on average that you've generated at the site. Before I guess the next topic here would be, before I get into some of the specifics of actually undertaking an audit, would be health and safety. So when it comes to waste auditing, I think it might go without saying, but there are health and safety factors that need to be considered, and the most common potential hazards being lifting, traffic road hazards if you're doing municipal or residential types of waste audits, or working in a recycling facility or a transfer station or landfill. Certainly sharp objects are very common in waste streams, from broken glass to metal objects to even sharps, syringes and things like that are not uncommon to come across. Dirty, unsanitary materials, as you can, I'm sure, imagine, from spoiled, rotten food to diapers and healthcare materials and all kinds of things like that. Slip and chip hazards, equipment, machinery, so compactors, loaders, forklifts, and so on. The photos I have actually on this slide are not listed as my most common potential hazards, because hopefully they're not that common, but this was an example of an audit we did at a landfill site in Northern Ontario, and we had a bear come and visit our tent overnight. We were not on site at the time, but you can see that was a hazard specific to that particular site that we had to be aware of. So when we talk about a waste composition audit then, and I'm going to specifically go down the path of assuming we're doing a physical or hands-on audit, the idea would be to gather a representative sample of waste generated over a regular day-to-day operations. So we would recommend or suggest you kind of determine what a typical generation or business cycle might be for our location or site. So in some cases, every day is very similar one day to the next. So 24 or 48 hour sample of waste generated is going to give you a good picture of what's happening there. In other cases, there can be significant variability over the course of one day to the next, or over the course of a week, where Tuesday's the day our raw materials are received. Fridays are the day that things get. So you have to, think about those factors when determining what an appropriate sample size of waste would be to collect. Ideally, you're going to have all waste streams. I shouldn't say all waste streams, but not only the garbage, but garbage and recycling, and if applicable, organics collected over that same cycle. So that you can get a full profile or picture of what is being generated and how much is ending up in each stream. There are some waste streams where it's just not practical or feasible to collect a sample for, and for which reliable records would likely be available. And I will use, I guess some examples there would be like scrap metal, for example. There's a manufacturing facility that has dedicated scrap metal bins. They generate potentially literally tons of scrap metal a day. Those are the types of bins that would have accurate weight records associated with them because they're collected from that site alone. They get weighed, and there's associated records with those. We wouldn't ask, or we wouldn't see a need to have the scrap metal set aside for the purposes of sorting and weighing if those records are available. In some cases, facilities will have dedicated corrugated cardboard bins for which records are available, or there may be a confidential shredding tote system in place at a facility, and you're not going to be going by hand through confidential documents, so there's often weight records available for a waste stream like that. Otherwise, we do often see that people kind of just forget about or don't include the commingled or regular recycling streams in the audits, and I think that's an important stream to include or consider as well. So for the reasons that I explained earlier, where there's often not good, reliable, actual weights available for those streams, but also because even if you did have weights for it, I think it's important to understand what the constituent components are of those streams. So how much contamination is in the recycling, or even though it is being recycled, is there potential, what kinds of materials are ending up in there that we could have opportunity for reducing and not generating in the first place. You can see in this photo here, this is just a general setup that we have for a hands-on waste audit, where we have a sorting table. We have a number of, in this case, is blue boxes and garbage cans around the perimeter. Each one of those bins would be allocated for a particular material category. So we're talking here about literally putting bags of waste or recycling on the table and ripping them open and sorting the contents by hand into various material categories. Sometimes this can get quite detailed, where we'll be sorting and separating into over 100 different categories of materials. So in particular, in the municipal world, in the municipal sector, residential audits, it can be quite detailed, and often that's related to these EPR, extended producer responsibility programs that I mentioned earlier, where you might have to not only know, is this, what kind of, is it paper, plastic, metal, or glass, but okay, what kind of plastic is it? Is it PET? Okay, is it a number one PET bottle, jar, or jug? Is it a beverage bottle or non-beverage bottle? Is it color? Is it clear? Is it family size or portion size? And you can quickly see how detailed these breakdowns can get. So on and so forth. Food waste. Okay, is there food waste? Sometimes you get into even more particularly, is it avoidable or unavoidable food waste? So is it, if it's avoidable food waste, that would be kind of like leftovers or spoiled or rotten food that people just didn't get to or finish in time. Unavoidable would be like bones and pits, and so there's some circumstances where that level of information may be important as well. I would say that it's easy to go to too much detail, and again, going back to the idea of understanding what the purpose and the scope and what you want to get out of the study is, particularly for a facility audit. I think it's safe to say that it doesn't really matter in some circumstances if it's a PET bottle that's green or clear, it's a matter of, okay, we have a recyclable beverage or a recyclable bottle in the garbage. So again, it's that trade-off between cost and what you want to get out of the study. And in some cases, if you're too detailed to have a little category, a subcategory, subcategory for every little thing, that can kind of work against you, and that you could end up with some wacky results because you're so granular, and every individual item you find having a category, and when you start to extrapolate things like that, it can make some things look a little bit odd. So just something to be aware of and consider. I guess the only other point I wanted to add on this with regards to sampling and separating materials is to consider whether there's value in analyzing the waste by generation zone or functional area of a facility, for example. So do we want the sample to be for the facility as a whole, or do we want to perhaps understand the composition of the waste streams that are coming out of the cafeteria versus the office area versus, you know, the warehouse, or you know, so on and so forth, separately. And in many cases, that's a level of detail that can be quite helpful. So something, again, to consider as you're planning and scoping out an audit. So in that previous slide, you saw a kind of a general setup there of some of the things that you need to undertake an audit, from the tables and bins and so on. Personal protective equipment for the auditors, tarps, knives, leak-proof bins. I have a little note here to limit the variety of bin types, and this again just comes down to efficiencies and being accurate with your numbers. So you know, we need to account, we're separating all these samples into the various bins, and we need to weigh those bins to get the net weight of the contents. If you have a standard set of bins that all weigh the same, it just expedites the process, and that you can set a, you know, a tare weight on your scale and just run the bins through. Digital scale recommended, as precise as they can get it. The ones that our team use most often have the capacity of 40 up to 40 kilos, but a precision of 0.01 kilograms. You can get some higher capacity scales, but generally those could accommodate things that we couldn't lift anyway, and then you lose the precision factor there. So cameras, bags, tags. So after, you know, you've had your sample collected, you've ripped open the bags, you've sorted and separated all the constituent materials into their various bins by category. The next step would be to weigh them all. So you can see in this particular picture, we have our data recorder, and then we have someone helping out by putting each one of those individual bins across the scale, and we're recording the results on a field log sheet. From that data, then essentially what you're able to do is you're able to build a waste composition profile for that stream or for that particular sample. So this pie chart shows an example of where we did have a facility. This was a school in this case, collect and label their samples by functional area. So we were able to say, okay, you generated X amount of kilograms per day, of which, you know, 37% came out of the classrooms, 27% of the cafeteria, and so on. And then on the composition side of things, you know, breaking down or summarizing what proportion of the waste stream was comprised of the various material types. And we would have been able to go on in further detail here and breaking down a little bit further. Okay, of the 66% of the waste that was paper, here's what proportion of that was you know, recyclable paper versus non, or versus cardboard, or so on and so forth. So in addition to the quantitative types of data that you would collect, there's also significant value on the qualitative side of things as well. So that would be observing and making note of you know, how waste is managed? What are the management practices that come into play with waste in a particular facility? What are the particulars of what is or is not accepted in the existing recycling or diversion programs that are in place at the facility? How should it be collected? Is our materials allowed to be bagged in the recycling carts? Do they have to be clear bags? If you have an organics program, is that stuff able to be bagged? Does papers have to be separated from containers and these kind of things? A facility tour is always a good thing to do, so you can observe what's in place and how things are managed, from what kind of bins there are. Is there signage associated with them? Is the signage accurate? Is it clear? Does it make sense? You could talk to people on site to find out if they have any concerns or what some of the common issues are that they have with managing the waste program or just using it as a user themselves. All kinds of interesting tidbits can be learned by doing a facility tour, and it often can help tie together the evidence that you're finding on the qualitative or the quantitative side of things as you're sorting and separating and saying, look, I see there's a lot of contamination, the recycling from this particular area of the facility, and lo and behold, you do a tour of the facility and you find that there's no signage associated with it, or there's ambiguous signage associated with the recycling bins in that area or something like that. Excuse me. So, after you've done your sampling, your sorting, your weighing, you've taken your facility tour and done your qualitative notes and so on and so forth. What are the types of things, or how, what can you get out of, or what are the performance indicators you can calculate based on the results of the waste audit? So I'm going to go through a few of the primary ones here and how you'd go about taking that next step. So really, the first thing we would most often do is, assuming we're understanding we're doing as a sample of material, so this is a snapshot in time, we would extrapolate the results or annualize the results of what we found. And there's a couple different ways you can go about doing that. So the first one is what we would call the extrapolation method. And so I apologize if you can hear my dog barking in the background here, but this is one of these side effects of working from home and having a delivery coming in. But anyway, I'll keep plugging away here. The extrapolation method would be the approach you take if the waste records for your site are not accurate or verifiable. So if they can't find any, or if you do get them and they turn out to be just estimates or something like that, the approach you would take here is taking your waste audit sample generation simply multiplied by the operating days. So for example, if we had a facility collect a 24-hour waste audit sample, and the facility produced 100 kilograms of food waste during that period of time, and the facility operates 250 days per year. Therefore, we would say that food waste generation would be calculated as 100 kilograms, which is our 1-day sample, times 250 operating days a year. And we would estimate the annual food waste generation to be 25,000 kilograms in this case. So you can repeat that for every material category, for every stream. Essentially taking your waste audit sample multiplied by however many iterations of that sample period there would be in a year to estimate your annual generation. If you're dealing with a situation where you have accurate and verifiable records, you would use the mass ratio method of annualization. So in this case, you would use your waste audit sample composition percentage. So the proportion, you would break down your waste audit sample by percentage and multiply that by your known or verified annual weight of waste generated. So for example, let's say we had, it doesn't matter what the waste audit sample period was, we found that in that sample, there was a 10% of the sample was garbage was corrugated cardboard. Our verified records showed that 25,000 kilograms of garbage was disposed annually. Therefore, we would estimate that the annual cardboard disposed would be calculated as 10% times 25,000 kilograms or 2,500 kilograms per year. So again, just there's two different annual extrapolation methods there, and it's not, in some cases you may use one method for one particular waste stream and another method for another, depending on, again, how accurate or verifiable or how confident you are in the numbers you have for those particular streams. The next would be, performance indicator would be the normalized or per unit generation rate. So for example, per employee, per kilogram per employee per year. This is particularly helpful to track progress or look at the situation changing over time, over a number of years. So it allows you to normalize things for fluctuating employee numbers, or product production increases, or number of visitors, or number of students changing from year over year at a school or something like that. It is, so you might see the absolute values for waste and recycling going up or down, but if you were to normalize that on a per person or per employee basis, it provides you some additional context to be able to understand what may be contributing, or what may be factors contributing to those changes over time. And I added a note here that this will be particularly significant over the last couple of years, again, with the amount of work from home situations and so on and so forth. So, on paper, you might see that, oh, wow, the waste generation at this facility has gone down by 80% over last year. Well, maybe that's because there's almost nobody working there on a day-to-day basis. I've literally been in some office complexes recently where there would be normally 800 or 900 people in the building, and there 40 or 50 people maybe in there a day. So the next performance indicator I'm going to mention here is the diversion rate. This might be, even for those of you who may not be in the waste industry or sector yourself, might be a term you're familiar with. The diversion rate is the proportion of the total mass of materials generated that was diverted to reuse or recycling. So in other words, of everything, garbage recycling, everything that we generated on site, what proportion of that actually was diverted. This is often used as a primary performance indicator against which targets are set. So I think it's a relatively easy concept to understand, and that it's often maybe one of the reasons why it's often used as kind of, in some cases, it's the be all and end all. What everybody's striving for is increasing diversion rate. We need a higher diversion rate, and I think it's a good indicator, but I certainly take every opportunity I can to caution people to not put too much emphasis on the diversion rate alone, so it doesn't necessarily show or tell the whole picture. In a way, if you're kind of really focused on or striving for diversion rate, it sort of incentivizes wasting more divertible materials. So if I end up with more paper in my recycling bin, my diversion rate is going to go up. So if I print more, or print single sided instead of double, or it's kind of counterproductive in some cases, or it could potentially, it doesn't incentivize reduction, it just really incentivizes recycling more. So I guess another example I might, or some anecdotes I could provide here would be kind of the panic sometimes that we get initially if we have a facility that we report that the diversion rate has stagnated or gone down, and on paper that looks bad, or like, what's going on? I said, no, it's not necessarily a bad thing. You put in you put in this water bottle refilling station, you gave everybody refillable water bottles, and it resulted in single-use water bottles being decreased in your recycling stream last year. That's a good thing. It resulted in your diversion rate going down because there was less recyclable bottles in your recycling stream, but who cares? That's not a bad thing. So just again, a point I'd like to make, and sometimes I see the light bulb go off when I do these kind of talks or discussions with people in person, in terms of seeing the heads starting to shake, and again, being aware of that. I could spend probably an hour just discussing diversion rate alone, but I'll move on. In my opinion, I think capture rate is another indicator, and I think it may be even better or more important, or I put more weight into this one as far as how well a facility is doing. And the capture rate is the proportion of total mass of a divertible materials that were successfully diverted to reuse or recycling. So this is looking at, okay, for all the waste that we generate that can be or could be diverted on our existing program, what proportion of it are we actually successfully capturing in the recycling? So this table I have on the slide is showing an example of breakdown of capture rates for various material types from our facility. And I'll just take the first row as an example. So this facility, we generated 275 kilograms per year of newspaper. We found that 202 of those kilograms ended up in the recycling, and the remaining 73 ended up or were incorrectly placed in the garbage for disposal. So based on that, we say that the capture rate was 73%. So in other words, of all the newspaper waste that was generated on site, 73% of it ended up in the recycling as it should. So that's showing us that there's some opportunity here to improve or, increase the capture rate for that particular material. And this can be calculated on a material by material basis. It can also be calculated overall as is summarized in the bottom row of this particular table. So this facility generated 8,600 and change kilograms of potentially recyclable material, of which 6,776 ended up in the recycling. The remaining 1,840 were disposed for an overall capture rate of 78.64%. And then finally, the last performance indicator that I wanted to mention here is contamination rate. So this is the proportion of a recycling or reuse stream that is not accepted in that stream. For example, food waste in the recycling bin. Contamination in the diversion stream should be deducted from the total diverted materials and added to disposed. And as I mentioned previously, waste audit should include composition analysis of the recycling stream. So again, often for some reason, the recycling stream really, or recycling or other diversion streams aren't really looked at, and it can be significant in some cases. We are talking 10, 20, 30%, and we find in many cases of what is in the recycling carts or bins is stuff that shouldn't be in there. So even if you had actual weights for what was going out in those recycling carts or bins, if 20 or 30% of it is stuff that shouldn't be in there, it's going to end up disposed when it gets to the processing facility anyways. So through the audit process, you should be accounting for that and backing it off. So that contamination in the recycling streams should not be counted as diverted materials. It needs to be added to the disposed quantities for that particular sample or that particular site. So I guess in closing there, when it comes to the outcomes or what you're calculating and the performance indicators you're able to report on from undertaking a waste audit, there is not a one and only number that you can hang your hat on, so to speak, in terms of, oh, here's how well we're doing. You have to, I think, take several into consideration, and it's a combination of them that really gives you the true picture of what it is that's happening. So again, it's been about an hour now that I've been rambling here, and I hope I've been able to provide you a general overview and understanding of waste auditing, and to the extent that I could, I got into some detail on some approaches and ways you can go about calculating some numbers. Certainly, for those that would be interested in learning more, there are some additional avenues you can go on that. The Circular Innovation Council, formerly Recycling Council of Ontario, does have a waste auditor a training course, a 2-day course that gets into a lot more detail on these kind of things. And certainly, if anybody would like to discuss further or like any other information on other types of audits, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be happy to have a chat. And with that, again, thanks for your interest, and yeah, have a nice day.